Okay, so this is the part 2 of the seminar paper guidance, and in the video I'll just be showing you how to do the paper. But before I get there, let me just explain some things on why the theory, and this is very, very important. If you notice that at the end of the whole unit you will have to submit a seminar paper, and unlike most professors, I do not take the proposal approach. And the reason why I do not take the proposal approach is this: it's an assumption that you are going to collect primary data, and the question then becomes, this being a supply chain management seminar paper, at what point will that data be found within the ecosystem? So for my classes and my unit, I prefer using the Harvard Business School standard, and this is where you're taking a case study approach. And within the case study approach, you are picking a company, and within this company you are elucidating several issues that are coming either from their strategy, coming from their processes, or coming from their practices within the organization. Let me repeat. The reason why I had to give the theory within the first video and this video, I will do also that, and as many videos as is needed so that the idea is home. We need first of all to build on the idea and the principles of that idea. So we come up with models, we come up with theories, we come up with notes, or we come up with understanding of what exactly supply chain management is all about. That is step one. Step two is basically trying to show the application, and this is what I've been doing in the first video: show the bit of application within the principles that we have within the supply chain management arena, and show some of the challenges that these organizations are facing as they implement the principles that we have here. Now, as is custom, you're supposed to submit a seminar paper. I prefer, but because of time it's not possible, I prefer the seminar paper be presented and then marked at the end, but because of time we may not be able to do that. So as I was saying, the common practice among most professors within JKO1 is to have people submit proposals, but there's a problem with that. The problem is that the proposal is a research-based document, and this research-based document has missing bits, and the first one which is missing is the data. Now the question is, how do we process a half-baked document? And the most important part of that document is missing, which is the recommendations, and hence I take the approach of the case study method. Now, for us to get the case study method used by the Harvard Business School, there are three things that you need to understand, and I'll repeat them. How is this company over here implementing their processes, implementing their practices, or implementing the various supply chain management strategies? And what are the challenges? That's one. What are the issues in adoption? That two. What are the ecological issues that are affecting the bottom line, and so forth and so forth? Now, within that secondary data, which you can be able to collect through data review, literature review, and so forth, you'll be able to come up with your own analytical conclusion of what could be causing the problem. Now, partly, if we were to break this process down, it would look something like this. will be, what are the problems here? So you have problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, problem 4. What are the root causes of that problem? What are some of the surface causes of that problem? And you can come up with your own recommendations and conclusions from the causes of the problem. Now, this you can use benchmarking, where another company faced the same problem and how did they exactly resolve it. Now, so in this approach over here, we are not collecting data. We are basically looking at the case study from a problem point of view and a root cause analysis point of view. Then we benchmark on the companies that have faced the same problem, and using that literature, we possibly come up with a conclusion and a recommendation. This is somewhat very simple and somewhat very easy to execute, and it brings on board a very enriching seminar paper compared to a research proposal. Okay, so what I would suggest is, first of all, go through the first video and go through this video to understand most of the issues that we shall talk about. Now, in this video, I will just take a few concepts, try to show you in practice through case studies some of the issues that are there and possible solutions if there be there. Then the last part of the video, I'll show you the format of the seminar paper according to Harvard Business School, and this is what you will use to develop a paper for the end of semester assessment. So we begin. I'll begin with the operations or decisions. Again, you can refer to these videos or you can refer to the notes which I sent, and they're the basics of supply chain management, and you decide which field or which arena are you comfortable with and which one can you pick. So that is very important to remember. So we begin. What are some of the operations and decisions that are made in supply chain management? Now, this is important because when you be picking the case study to pick or the company to study, I want you to restrict yourself to the operations. There are about 8, and you can refer them. You can refer to some of them in the first video, but you can pick any of them and pick a company based on those operations. So I'll just discuss a few. 1, we have outsourcing. 2, we have returns management. 3, we have relationship management. 4, we have demand management. 5, operations management. They're about 8, but I'll just restrict myself to this. So the decisions that are made or the things that every supply chain exists to execute include these. Let's see how we would approach this whole issue by looking at outsourcing. Now, the most simplistic definition of outsourcing is where you keep the core functions in-house. And you outsource the non-core functions. Therefore, if this is the principle of outsourcing, JKUAT, being a university and focusing on research, training, and innovation, they keep the 3 functions in-house: research, training, and innovation, and then outsource the other functions that are non-core, for example, catering and so forth and so forth. Now, there is a reason why that does not happen, and the reason is that in some cases the non-core function can be so integral to the survival or the bottom line of the organization, they decide to keep it. Again, a good example would be JKUAT, where they're keeping the catering and keeping the hostel management in-house. Now, under outsourcing, we say, or outsourcing or insourcing, we say it is a spectrum where on one end you have insourcing and the other end you have outsourcing. And insourcing, basically, you are your own supplier. You are looking at the components or services that you need and you supply them yourself. Outsourcing, you are using a third party to provide services for you. Now, there are situations where instead of being purely insourced, some firms will opt to be a hybrid of both, where they are both insourced and outsourced. So let's see again an example of this. Toyota company. Now, about 30% of their electrical components are insourced, while the other 70% is outsourced. What are some of the reasons, or what are some of the challenges they would be trying to solve when doing or making such a decision? One would be supply disruptions are very, very common, in the sense that we had a pandemic, and if you're relying 100% on your suppliers who are somewhere where there is a lockdown, then your whole supply system is affected. So keep 30% in-house just in case there is disruption within the supply chain. But whenever you're thinking about the decision to insource or outsource, the problem they are trying to solve, or the thing they are seeking most, and we said this in the first video, is trying to establish some bit of control or trying to get some bit of cost benefits that are very, very important to the firm. What do we mean by control? If I am supplying my own inputs, as Toyota is doing, I can be able to control everything that is happening within the supply chain. And this also can have an additional benefit of what we call supply chain visibility. And we said this is the ability to see everything within the supply chain, the parties, the operations, the practices, and so forth. And firms have always been trying to get what you call end-to-end supply chain visibility, from top to bottom, from the supplier of the supplier to the end consumer, ability to see everything that is happening. But when you're thinking about this control cost paradigm, we say that any firm that seeks control of the supply chain seeks insourcing. Any firm that seeks cost benefits must go to outsourcing. And within the spectrum of things, this is what I want you to see. So if I wanted more control, and in terms of cost, there are several things that I can have. You can have what you call a local insourced system or a local outsourced system. You can also have what you call a global insourced system or a global outsourced system. Now, within a local insourced system, this is why I'm in Kenya and I am my own supplier. Control is highest at this stage. Now, when you go to global outsourced, cost benefits are highest on this stage. Now, the risk comes in here. If you outsource too much, then you become what you call a virtual firm. I'll repeat. If you outsource too much, you become what we call a virtual firm. Let me just add something here. Risk management. a virtual firm. And this is a situation where your core purpose of existence becomes too blurred by the fact that most of your operations are being done by another firm. Let's see examples of this. Nike does not produce, Nike does not ship, Nike does not own the shops where the products are sold. It uses franchises. Now, if you think about it keenly, if you do not produce, if you do not ship, and if you do not own the shops, why exactly do you exist? That's a risk, as it were, and that's a problem. Now, the issue here is that's a very flexible system, one, but when it comes to supply chain visibility, everything is lost. And that's why I said in the first video, Nike has had an issue, and the issue is they've been accused of using suppliers that are using child labor. Now, that is a form of lost control, and they lost that control by becoming a virtual firm. Now, another firm would be Bharti Airtel, and this is the Indian version of the Africa Airtel that we have here. And they have outsourced their network systems, they have outsourced their IT systems, and they have outsourced their telecommunication system, and they have outsourced their contact centers. Now, if you think about it keenly, Airtel or Bharti Airtel in this case, why do they exist? If you are outsourcing your network system, why do you exist? That is so core that it should be kept in-house. If you are outsourcing your IT systems, why do you exist? If you're outsourcing your contact center, again, why do you exist? But all this has had savings of about 3,000 employees going to their suppliers. Now, that is a saving, yes, and that is a benefit, yes, but there is a risk. Again, the functions of the organizations have become too blunt that it is not clear why the organization exists. So there is a risk. When you're seeking control against cost, there is a risk. Where you risk doing it too much that this happens, or where you seek to have so much control you become a rigid firm. Therefore, the question under outsourcing is, what is the core function of the organization and what should be outsourced? And we said further that in this discussion, how you determine the core functions, there are several models. The first one we said is the product architecture model. The second one is the business process route model. And under the product architecture, you are subdividing the products into strategic products and non-strategic products. The strategic products you keep in-house, and the non-strategic products you give to other suppliers. It seems simple, but there's a complexity to it. Think about it this way. And herein comes another case, Xbox. We said that Xbox is a product owned by Microsoft. Now, if Microsoft had decided, and this was their goal. Their goal was to have this product in the market at $400. Now they're launching a new product. Microsoft is a software company. So the question is, how do you get a hardware product from a software company to the market at the cheapest price? Because the competitor was PlayStation by then. And they discovered that several things cannot happen. They cannot become their own suppliers. They cannot be locally insourced or globally insourced. And the reason is that the cost of building the factories, the learning curve involved in the production system, everything that would entail creating that production system is too expensive, and they would miss the $400 mark. So how did they decide to deal with the problem? They went to a company called Flextronics. Now, Flextronics is a company that produces electrical hardware systems and so forth, and they took the contract from Microsoft so that they can create the product Xbox, and yes, they were able to hit the market at $400. But there is a problem. Flextronics is owned by Sony, and Sony owns PlayStation. PlayStation is the immediate competitor of Xbox, so therein is a problem where I have given my core product architecture to my competitor, but how do I protect that technology, or how do I protect the intellectual property? That is a very important question to answer. Another example, Tata was struggling, and they are known for diesel engine technology, but the diesel engine was lagging behind. But because they wanted to be more competitive in the space, in the construction space, where the big trucks that are used for construction and so forth, they decided they are going to outsource their diesel engine technology to a company that was up to speed with the current technologies, and that was Fiat. Now the problem is Fiat and Tata are in the same competitive space. So you've given the right to produce a very core product to you. It is a strategic product, but you've given it to your competitor. So how do you manage that risk is a very important question to answer. Now, collectively, if we look at all these things that we've spoken about, there are benefits to outsourcing and there are risks to outsourcing. So if you're picking a case, be able be able to elucidate these ideas and articulate them very, very well, as we are doing. Now we go to another example of a decision, and this is returns management. Returns management. And in returns management, we are thinking of it this way: the products have gone through the logistics function to the customer. The question then becomes, how do some of these products make it back into the supply chain? Maybe they're faulting, maybe you need to do refills and so forth and so forth. Now, it is important to remember returns management is not a luxury, especially if you're a Fortune 500 company. So if we were to give an example, two come to mind. First one is Samsung, and the second one is Johnson and Johnson. So Samsung comes up with a washing machine that I was going for, I think about 380 USD. The exact price actually I missed, but thereabouts. And they ship those products all the way to the customer. Now, what Samsung had not foreseen is this: that if the product is faulty, it would affect their bottom line, especially when you're looking at the product ranges that Samsung was coming up with. And it was discovered that the new product that they came up with had a fault, and it was shaking a lot and vibrating a lot, and sometimes it was causing injuries to children and even adults, in some cases damages in some other cases. So Samsung had two things. The first one is, how do you respond from an ethical minimum perspective, and how do you respond from an ethical maximum perspective? Minimum would be this: Samsung tells the customers, kindly keep the washing machine away from children, but the damage is already done. So the question is, how do you solve the problem of the faulty machines? So they opted to take it to an ethical maximum, where they had what we call product recalls, and this is a form of returns management. Product recall. Now, product recall, they recalled the washing machines, and this costed a lot of money, but from an ethical perspective, they were operating from an ethical maximum. Now you go to Johnson and Johnson, they come up with a drug, novel drug, novel drug, and this drug was meant for the general masses, OTC, and this new drug went through the traditional supply chain until a problem arose. It was discovered that people were dying from the consumption of the drug. Now, Johnson and Johnson did not know how an FDA approved drug would be causing deaths, because the deaths were all pointing to the drug that was used. So they started an investigation, and it was discovered that the drug, or the prescription that they were given to the patients, had been laced with potassium cyanide by a person within the supply chain. Now, it is easy for you to blame the perpetrator of this and say our drug is okay, we just had a sociopath within our supply chain, but it is not enough. So Johnson, again, product recall, recall the product at a very high price, and then they came up with a world standard that is used today, the seal on the drugs, which implies if the seal is broken, kindly do not use the drug. That is a way of responding. And the product recall is an example of returns management. So if you do decide to take the returns management perspective, you can look for case studies where the product recall and the challenges that entail it is applied. A good example would be Johnson and Johnson, Samsung, and also Toyota, where they had sticking gas pedals. Same thing. You came up with a product. The product was good, but when the product got to the customer, there was an issue. So, how do you solve the problem? That's very important to remember. So I'll just do one more. We'll just go to risk management, and under risk management we say that every risk within the supply chain is looked at in two ways: the probability of that risk and the impact of that risk. And the models that we can use can be the PESO model to understand the risks, and also you have the Porter's five forces model. Now, if we are thinking about the Porter's five forces model, he says several things need to come to mind: the bargaining power of buyers, the bargaining power of sellers, you have new entrants, you have rivalry from competition, and you have substitutes, or how easily your product is substitutable. All these are risks. And if you look at the first risk, the bargaining power of buyers and sellers, two things come to mind. You can create what you have: a captive buyer or a captive seller. A captive buyer is one who is stuck to a product because cost of switching is high or the technology is unique. A captive seller is a person who is stuck to a certain buyer because the product nature does not have very many users. Now, when thinking about all these risks, both external, ecological, and internal within the system, we say look at Kraljich's approach to it. Yes, that's one. But two, look at the matrix in terms of the strategies that you can use. And we say under the probability, it can be high or low. Under the impact, it can be high or low. So you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the question you need to ask yourself: what do you do when your risks are under 1? What do you do when your risks are under 2? What do you do when your risk under 3? And so forth. So let's pick an example. I have a product, and this product depreciates at a very high rate, let's say 0.01% in a week. That's an electronic product. So the question is, how do I manage that risk for me? I would say a VMI or RMI system would be good, because this is a form of risk transfer. I am moving the goods to my distributors or retailers and making sure they incur the risk of pushing that product to the end consumer. I don't want the depreciation to happen while it's under my premises. And this is one of the reasons that led to problems at Cisco, and also almost led to the closure of Nokia. It is where you're holding goods and the goods are losing value very fast, and you do not have a mode of pushing them to the market because they're becoming obsolete in a way. So you want to manage that dead stock. How do you push it? Using the RMI systems or the VMI systems. The stockless purchasing system also is a way of risk transfer. Now, that is in the risk management. So if you were to go to the last one before I show you how to do the paper, let's look at relationship management. Under relationship management, we say that relationships can take two main approaches: adversarial approach or collaborative approach. And under adversarial, these are transactional in nature. I give you the information and money, you give me the goods. It's a one-off transaction. But the collaborative one is where you are sharing information, resources to make sure it is a win-win in the long run. This is a win-lose. But while this is all glossy in theory, what are the challenges of it in practice? I take the example of Toyota. This is 1950 and 1960. They were using what you call Kiretsu system, and this was a form of lead time management. And what they did is, this being Toyota, they decided to enter into long-term contracts with suppliers 25 years and above, and this gave the incentive to suppliers to come closer to their premises, where the time was between 15 minutes and 45 minutes respectively. Now this is a very huge gain to the organization here, because it means they do not need to hold stock at any point, since their suppliers are only 15 to 45 minutes at once. So just integrate your system with that of the suppliers, so that anytime our stock is dwindling, it is showing up on the supplier system. This is the Kiretsu system. It was a very good system of lead time management. But if you think about it keenly, there is a risk that comes from this, and one that includes the complacency of suppliers who've been given 25 years worth of contracts. So how do you solve the problem? A benchmark would be there that use performance-based contracts in the short term or in the short term period. That's one. Another thing in relationship management we say is supplier-based rationalization. Let me just get this. Mhm. Just a minute. Mhm. Mhm. Just give it some time. Okay, so we go to what I was speaking about, supplier rationalization. So under relationship management also, we have the issue of supplier rationalization. And under rationalization, we say be very, very wary and be very, very careful when you're dropping a supplier to reduce your base or adding a supplier to increase your base and options. And the reason is that every supplier is considered to be a relationship. And the best way to see this is by using Pepsi. Now, all products under the soft drinks industry use one raw material in large quantity, and that's CO2, carbon dioxide, when producing it. Now, carbon dioxide is a byproduct. You cannot be able to produce it as a core product. It is a byproduct of. Therefore, most of the suppliers of this are manufacturers of fertilizer. They are manufacturing fertilizer and the byproduct is CO2. It is not their core business. So as Pepsi, the person who's supplying you the product that they are supplying is not in existence to supply it, and that's a conflict of interest as well, because they're not committed to meeting the capacity needs for you as an organization. That's the first thing. The second thing is this: the drinks that you're producing are cyclical in nature in terms of demand. For example, during the Russia, we had a World Cup at Russia, or some global competition of Russia, and there was shortage, serious shortage of soft drinks. And the reason is that the demand for the product rose exponentially, but the suppliers of fertilizer, their demand did not grow. So that means they are not incentivized to produce the CO2 to the companies that they are producing it for. So then the question Pepsi needs to ask themselves is, I have the following suppliers. Supplier 1 is a company called Maingas. Supplier 2 is a company called Flexigas. Supplier 3 is a company called Locogas. I can be able to get wider capacity if I add a supplier called Gazna, but I cannot add a fourth one here. They can only be 3 at any given time, 3 at all times. So the question to Pepsi then becomes, who do I remove from my supplier base over here? Now, the decision is not as simple as it seems, because you need to ask yourself some important questions when dealing with each and every company. Now, this is an example of a complexity when managing relationships with suppliers, where a hard decision must be made. Do we add this company to enhance our capacity? And if we do add, which company do we remove here? That is an example of a complexity within relationship management. So I hope using the several tasks and decisions made within the supply chain, it is clear some of the various parts that we need. And I'll try and summarize those parts. Among the parts that we need is, what is the problem that you're trying to give an answer to? And for you to give the problem, you need also to understand how is it affecting the farm. How is it affecting the farm? And as you're thinking about how is it affecting the farm, what is the farm doing about it? What is the farm doing about it? These are just among a few of the things that are needed when you are developing your paper. But conclusively speaking, let me provide the format that you will use. The format is as follows. The format. The first thing is you need to come up with the topic of the paper, and an example would be challenges in selecting suppliers. This is an example, and this topic would be appropriate when we are talking about Pepsi over here. What are the challenges in selecting a supplier? And as you're thinking about the challenges, you can also have other things of implementation of IT. You can have effects of some strategies and so forth and so forth. But I do not want you to think of it in the formats that we have in our research, where it's always effects of, or it's adoption of, or I want you to be as broad as possible and think of it as a paper that is not a proposal document. So what is the topic? That's the first thing. The second thing that I need is the case synopsis. And under the case synopsis, you are trying to give a summary of everything about that case study and what the problem is and so forth. It is more or less acts as an abstract to the case that you are doing. Then you go to the third one. What is the case objective? And here I want you again to ignore all the things that you've learned in terms of proposal, research, and writing. An objective can be as simple as an explanatory approach. I want to explain why is Pepsi doing what it is doing. That's an explanatory objective. An exploratory objective is trying to explain why something happened, or trying to determine what are some of the issues that affect the case. So in this case, what are the challenges farms face when selecting supplier? Farms face when selecting suppliers. That is an example of a question that you're trying to answer. Now I say that you keep the case objectives or questions to between 3 and 5. Now these objectives will close you in terms of the boundaries of your paper. Now if you're talking about challenges, you cannot go ahead and talk about adoption. If you're talking about adoption, you cannot go ahead and talk about challenges. It will restrict you to what exactly the case is all about. So the fourth thing is the background. I think this you're familiar with. Background or just an introduction. That's one. The fifth one is if there are any definition of terms that you feel are important, you will have them here. Then the sixth one is the focus of the paper. Focus of the paper. So you can have 6.1 become what you call a finer subdivision. This is where now you're dissecting the case study very systematically, and you're bringing various aspects of the case study to light. That's one. That's a finer subdivision. You can have as many subdivisions as you want. 6.2, 6.3, another subdivision, and so forth. So what are the examples of subdivisions that you can have here? You can do an industry analysis. That is an example of the subdivision. You can do the root cause analysis. That is an example of a subdivision. You can do stakeholder analysis. That's another example of a subdivision. You can even do risk analysis. That's another example of a subdivision. Then 7, you can have the second specific aspect of the paper. Again, you can have divisions. Number 1, finer subdivision of what you feel is important, then you go other subdivisions thereabout, as many as you feel are relevant to your case study. But there's something that I want to note, that it is very, very important that you have what you call literature review within each subdivision. So if you have 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 and so forth, 6.4 can be your literature review on the issues that you have elucidated here. Same thing here, you go to 7.4 literature review of the issues that you are elucidating within that case study. Then 8, we have what you call your summary. Then 9, you come up with your conclusion and recommendations that has come from your analysis here, or your analysis here. Before I forget, you can have the focus of your paper, that's 6. You can have a second aspect of your paper. You can also have as many as you want, 8, 9, 10, as many as you can have. You can develop them here. Then you have conclusions and recommendations. Then lastly, you have the bibliography, or the references to your work, So when coming up with your recommendations here, it is important to note that 9.1 needs to be a benchmark, because we're basically relying on secondary data to develop our paper. So if you can be able to get a benchmark within your recommendation, that is very, very important. So this here is the Harvard Business School format for seminar paper, and I feel it is better compared to what we have been accustomed to in terms of writing proposals and the structure of those proposals. So as you start in, what you are looking for therefore is a company. You pick a company, and once you pick the company, you will go through the decisions or operations of within supply chain management. And in this case, you will look at the notes which I sent you, and you can watch this video or the video that I sent in the first class. Then you can pick on something. So once you pick on that, for example, risk management, this is where you will now go back to the company and develop your paper on risk management specific areas, based on everything that we have discussed in terms of the format. So I'll repeat, you will basically pick a company, and from that company you will pick a decision within the supply chain management, and once you've picked it, you generate a paper from that operation that we're speaking about. So don't forget, root cause analysis is very important and is a must to be there. Understanding of the literature, let me just note it here, root cause analysis needs to be there. Understanding of your problem, how it is affecting the organization, what the firm is doing about it, literature review, all this need to be factored in within this holistic format that we just gave over here. So that's it for this class, and I'll be doing videos here and there just to help us understand how to go about it. In case of anything, just send me a WhatsApp message and I'll be able to revert soon as possible. Thank you so much.